Hello friends, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on October 11th, 2025. A large number of very important events took place today, so let's get started. And we will begin with another massive strike. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources report that on the night of October 11th, 2025, the Russian Federation launched a massive strike on the Odessa region. And pro-Ukrainian sources are publishing this map already from the morning of October 11th. As we can see, according to this map, drones were launched from the territory of the Rostov region. They crossed the territory over Crimea and struck targets in the territory of Odessa and the Odessa region. Sources report that the strikes were mainly carried out on energy and critical infrastructure facilities in the Odessa region. In these shots, we see a direct strike, most likely on a substation, after which power supply disruptions began throughout the entire region. Strikes were also carried out on the territory of the Kharkiv region. Very important objective control footage is also coming from this section of the front. This video was published tonight. In these shots, we first see a strike, followed immediately by a secondary detonation, a large explosion. Apparently, some kind of weapons depot, possibly a fuel storage facility, was destroyed. A brief analysis of this strike is coming in from the morning, stating what exactly was destroyed. But if we look at the settlement of Chuhuiv, we can see that it is located on the main supply artery that goes from the city of Kharkiv towards Kupiansk. Let me remind you, heavy fighting is currently taking place in Kupiansk. Also this morning, individual pro-Russian experts report that a significant shift has occurred in the territory of Kupiansk and the Kupiansk pocket. And already in the near future, individual sources, possibly even the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, will provide new information regarding the situation and state of affairs in this sector. There is a very high probability that in the coming weeks, possibly the entire western Kupiansk, northwestern Kupiansk, and southwestern Kupiansk will fully come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Something truly fundamental is happening here right now. Ukrainian authorities generally understand that the situation at the moment is extremely difficult, and starting from October 10th, some pro-Ukrainian politicians have gradually begun preparing the population of Ukraine for the fact that winter will be very difficult, winter will be severe, and that most likely there will be a blackout. For example, Mariana Bezula said that winter will be very severe and there will be a 100% blackout. There is no probability, no such option, that it will either happen or not. It will happen 100% apparently. The only question is how long it will last. 1 day, 2 days, a week, possibly several months. And in this regard, she urges the population of Ukraine, and especially the population of large cities, to consider leaving the capital of Ukraine, leaving large cities, and moving to the countryside for the winter period to survive this blackout there in the rural area. The only thing Mariana Bezula does not specify is where people will work in the countryside. In the cities, there is still an opportunity to receive a salary and go to work, but in small villages and small towns, apparently, this opportunity no longer exists. But she does not address this issue. Zelensky also understands that the situation is extremely critical, and now the political leadership of Kiev, is trying to find options on how to stop these bombings for at least a few weeks. And today, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine began disseminating information that Kiev and Ukraine are ready for a, let's say, winter truce, which could last during and throughout the Olympic Games, which will be held in Italy from February 6th to 22nd. But most likely, the Russian side will not accept such a truce. Next, we move towards the line of military contact, and we will begin with the Zaporizhzhia sector of the front, where the armed forces of the Russian Federation are continuing their offensive towards the settlements of Poltavka, Uspenivka, and Oleksiivka. Today, additional colorings appeared in the area of Oleksiivka, where the Russian army launched a decisive offensive a few days ago. The offensive in this sector began approximately on October 7th to 8th, 2025. It was during those days that the first reports and initial map corrections appeared, according to which the forward groups of the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to gain a foothold on the southern outskirts of this settlement. This information was provided by pro-Ukrainian cartographic services in the form of a small photograph on which we can observe 4 Russian soldiers. Shortly thereafter, this information was partially confirmed by neutral cartographers, stating that yes, indeed, saboteurs managed to enter the territory of Oleksivka, but without consolidating. Already on October 10th, the first objective control footage appeared, where we can see a Ukrainian tank attempting a counterattack in the southern part of Oleksiivka, trying to dislodge Russian units from the territory of farms and barracks. Based on this footage, most cartographers made the corresponding colorings. Today, October 11th, more information appeared regarding the situation along the front line, along the line of military contact. And as you can see, according to the footage published by the Ukrainian side, it can be concluded that the Russian army currently controls approximately 50% of Oleksivka and continues to advance further. The Ukrainian side is trying to transfer reinforcements towards Oleksivka to stabilize the front line. However, as we discussed in previous videos, full fire control has been established over the Vovcha River, and if any piece of equipment crosses the river with the aim of getting as close as possible to Russian positions to land troops or evacuate the wounded, that equipment is immediately struck using drones. That is, the territory from the Vovcha River to the settlement of Oleksivka is under full control. Based on this situation, it can be concluded that the Ukrainian side will completely lose control over the bridgehead south of the Vovcha River in the near future. Next, we move to the Pokrovsk sector of the front, where hostilities are also ongoing. Today there is a lot of interesting information. Let's discuss everything in detail, and we will start with the western flank. Today, Russian sources are publishing footage of strikes on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the territory of the Pokrovsk mine. Let me remind you that Russian units gained a foothold at the mine a few days ago, on its southeastern part, and since then, the Russian army has been actively trying to storm this direction. However, Ukrainian formations have firmly entrenched themselves in the northern and northwestern parts of this fortified area, and regular strikes using FABS are being carried out on these parts of the mine. That is, heavy, fierce fighting is taking place here. The Russian side is aiming to establish full control over this point in the near future. Next, we move to the settlement of Pokrovsk itself, and today perhaps the most important footage of the outgoing week, possibly even the outgoing month, perhaps the most important footage of the entire Pokrovsk offensive operation is being published from this sector. Here is the footage I am talking about now, and here we can observe the intersection of Olympiyska Street, with the road that runs from Pokrovsk towards Rodinska and further towards Dobropilya. And at this intersection, which is used by the AFU for supply logistics, we can observe dozens of destroyed pieces of equipment. Passenger cars, armored vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, and other equipment that either did not reach Pokrovsk or could not leave the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. I repeat once again, this is the most important footage telling us that at the moment there is no longer a road towards the Pokrovsk agglomeration, just as there is no longer an opportunity to leave it. This is, so to speak, a new type of cauldron. If previously, some 50 to 60 years ago, when talking about a cauldron, it most likely meant complete physical encirclement, now there is no need for complete encirclement. It is enough to have a large number of FPV drones over the main roads to the exit, and you can organize the exact same cauldron. And this footage primarily tells us that the situation and state of affairs for the AFU units in the agglomeration are already critical, extremely lamentable. The situation will only worsen in the near future. Also today, information is coming in from various pro-Russian experts and cartographers that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have breached the AFU's defense in the southeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration and have effectively entered the territory of the settlement of Mirnohrad in its southern part. Heavy fighting is currently underway, most likely for the villages of Kazatske, Promin, Balahan. But if this information is confirmed, if this correction has, so to speak, a connection to reality, then of course this is the start of military operations for the Mirnohrad agglomeration. For Mirnohrad, the city itself, as well as for its southern part, for the mines and the high ground. We will observe how the situation will develop further here. But again, based on the footage north of Pokrovsk, based on this graveyard of destroyed equipment, it can be assumed that the AFU will not be in a state to offer resistance for long. Next, we move to the breakthrough point, where the Russian army continues the offensive in the area of Kharkov, Volodymyrivka. Let me remind you that after a very long pause, the Russian side resumed the use of the tactic of mechanized assaults using a large number of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. And in these shots, we see strikes on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine north of the Volodymyrivka area. Footage is emerging of another group, another mechanized assault, as a result of which the village of Volodymyrivka was completely cleared. The Ukrainian army was forced to retreat north to Kharkov. That is, we see that the pincers are generally closing around the Kharkov pocket here, and if the situation continues to develop at the same pace and in the same vein, then in the near future, the Ukrainian side will first retreat towards Toretsk, Sofiivka, and from these two small villages will move further towards Novorihorivka and Druzhkivka. The battle for the Kharkov pocket is definitely over here. What we are seeing now is merely, so to speak, technical procedures, technical processes for the complete clearing of this pocket and pushing out the Ukrainian formations further north. Next, we move towards the settlement of Kostiantynivka. Today, information is coming in about a slight advance of the Russian army in the fields between Ivanopilia and Plishchiivka. Several strongholds have come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Let me remind you that the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation recently announced that the Klebenbike pocket was completely cleared and the AFU grouping was routed in this area. The front line is currently being leveled so that the Russian army can approach Kostiantynivka itself closely. On the Siversk-Lyman direction, the map has not undergone any changes today. The siege of the entire sector of the front continues. The Russian army carries out regular strikes on temporary deployment points, camps, and various locations where Ukrainian formations and units are concentrated. In these shots, we can observe how, during reconnaissance activities, the Russian side managed to identify another camp in the area of Stary Caravan, and as a result of the strikes on this camp, the temporary deployment point was completely destroyed. But as you can see, there are no corrections. We have already discussed the Kupiansk direction, and a couple more very important news items. Today, information is coming in that the US plans to introduce 100% tariffs on all goods coming from China. Let me remind you that initially, the Americans wanted to impose tariffs against China because China buys oil from Russia. However, it was not possible to link these two events. Apparently, the American administration is already rushing. Then a decision was made to accuse China of imposing some restrictions on the sale of its rare earth metals. We see that a new trade war is gaining momentum. Immediately after these statements, the American stock market slightly dropped, including the price of cryptocurrency. We are waiting for, accordingly, a reaction from China. But we see that the Chinese are gradually drawing the US's attention to themselves away from the conflicts in Ukraine and the Russian Federation. And that's all, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, give us your likes, and all the best.